Alrighty. Let's see what we got here, huh?
Yeah. This is the... Oh, yeah. Oh!
Whoa.
Always praying, never straying from the line. Staring at empty mirrors, looking for a sign.
Okay, now calm down. We'll get through all of this eventually. But it seems we've got some great news from the New World team. They've dumped a whole bunch of information on top of us right before the release of the beta. So we're going to be going through the Call to Arms Dev Diary video. But before that, we've got a little bit of a teaser that's been released to us on Twitter. Now, I apologize for the quality of this video. I can't seem to find a higher quality, and well, Twitter's upload video thing is not the best. But I figured it's still worth a little bit of an analysis, so we're going to go through that first before we jump into the dev diary itself. So what we're going to be taking a look at first is the short little 30-second clip of the special attacks that have been released by New World. I have to say, this has got me excited. This has me really looking forward to this game. But a quick caveat to that, there's a guy called Kira TV who's been doing this a lot longer than me, and he has a very negative outlook on how New World is going. Now, I do think he does make a lot of valid points. I do think his video is worth a watch, so I'm going to leave a link to it here. If you're not that excited about New World, if you think that the game has too many problems, that the devs don't know what they're doing, that might be the video for you. I base my videos off of what the New World dev team gives us directly. And hell, I might not know as much as him. He might know a hell of a lot more than I do, so if anything, trust his opinion more than mine. So I'm going to play this video through once, just so that you get the general overview of what we're looking at here from the different types of weapons, and then I'm going to run through it and do a little basic analysis on all the visuals that we see here. So let's get into it. Now, to me, that looks like we're going to get some real flavorful content in this game. Like, we've got some wide amounts of variation, and before we get into the specifics of what we're looking at here, I feel like I should do a general overview of all the weapons and all the abilities that we see here. The first thing to note is that all the abilities tend to show an indicator. They tend to telegraph their movement. They tend to have a color palette to them. The character tends to glow. This is good to see from a PvP perspective because you're not being blindsided by any of your opponent's attacks. You're going to have to rely on your timing. You're going to have to rely on a psychological fake out maybe. You're going to have to rely on knowing your weapon as well as what your opponent is going to be using against you. The better you get with a weapon in the game, hell, the better you get as a player using that game later on. So now the devs have said that they've taken a lot of inspiration for the combat from Dark Souls, and I think that definitely shows here. We have to target our opponents. There's no auto-locking. There's no standing still and just hitting in one place before they whittle your health down. There's a lot of dynamism in this game. There's a lot of movement, and that's good to see. I do enjoy seeing that. The only concern I could possibly think of having at this stage, looking at all this combat, is how is this going to be affected when a player has lag? You see, specifically, I'm going to be playing from a third world country, and as we know, my internet connection is not going to be as good as someone in Europe or someone in America. So I'm going to be dealing with more lag than other people. I'm interested to see how they handle any kind of lag that goes through the game, any inputs that may alter the way you play. But let's start looking at a few of the specifics here. Let's take a quick overview at all these special attacks that they've given us in this video to look at. So first we start off here taking a look at some of the ranged attacks that we've got. We've both got an axe, a single-handed hatchet being thrown at an enemy, and we also have a bow skill being launched at an enemy. Now, the interesting things to note there is it appears that these skills are both aimed. They both have to be aimed at your opponent. On top of this is good to see from a perspective of playing as a melee player. It means you still have options when dealing with both ranged enemies in PvE and in PvP. You're not stuck holding your weapon, praying to God that you can get close enough to them before they destroy you, or when you get close enough to them, you're missing 3/4 of your health bar. This is a nice balancing act to see. This is a nice combat version to see because you're not left out in the cold if you decide to go for melee. Another interesting thing to note here is if we take a look at the bowman launching his bow here, we have a golden glow around this attack. This is not a normal attack. This isn't just launching a single arrow. This appears to be a skill set, an ability that is being activated here. This is good from a PvP perspective because we get a telegraph of how powerful is the thing that's going to hit me. If you die in the game, you might feel like, oh, okay. If you end up fighting against someone else and you end up losing to them, you might think to yourself, oh, okay, I know exactly why I died. I wasn't fast enough to dodge or block this one very special ability that I know about that bow wielders have that does a lot of damage. You don't feel like you were slighted or like someone is cheating or using a mechanic against you. It places the blame on your shoulders for either not understanding the power of the ability that the opponent has or for not being good enough to dodge it. And this is good to see because this allows a player to look inward at what has happened in the previous battle that they may have lost and improve upon it instead of feeling slighted. This is a particularly exciting thing to see for me because it gives you telegraphing without slighting either player. It also makes your abilities feel impactful. There's a visual that goes along with it. The thing you see might be the scariest thing in the world that you're launching at someone or someone is launching at you. Now here's another great thing to see. Right here, we've got a sword and board character who's using a shield and a one-handed sword. We have a gap closer here. We have a gap closer with an indicator behind it. We know this guy is lunging forward. This is fantastic because if you're working in a group, this might be the ability you need to use on your opponents to make sure that you get the aggro, that you are allowed to push out ahead of your group and ensure that you are tanking all the damage while everyone in the back does the damage for you. This not only allows for that, but when it comes to a PvP situation, this allows you to have more than just a defensive playstyle if you've chosen a sword and shield. This allows you to lunge forward. This is a gap closer. This ensures that you get to your opponent before they've whittled down 90% of your health again. This is great to see. This is balanced. This looks like it'll be down to tuning numbers when this game is released, as opposed to adding in new abilities or putting a band-aid over old abilities in order to make up for things that aren't working in the PvP setting specifically. Next, looking at what looks like a crusader to me with this two-handed hammer, we get some great visuals behind this. We get to see a golden glow while he's winding up his attack. We get to see a heavy swing after that. This allows us to know that there are going to be extra effects to consider in New World's combat. This allows depth in the combat system. We don't have to just worry about telegraphing our attacks and this golden glow that goes around us when fighting other players. We've got to think about timing. It's fairly obvious that this two-handed hammer takes a lot longer to wind up than the previously mentioned one-handed sword. That would allow us to give timings to the game. As was said by the developers, the combat was very heavily influenced by Dark Souls, and I feel like they've taken the best elements of it and mushed it down into one MMO game. This is great to see, and it gives you a very action-packed vibe without feeling like you're getting slighted by the combat. This also makes it feel like you've got an impact in your abilities. It makes it feel like what you are doing in the world really matters. Like there is actually a heavy swing here and you can feel that impact. Not only because of the way the weapons behave, but also because of the glow around you. Those glows might just be telling us how strong an attack is. And what's really exciting to see is that all of these attacks so far show that it's not just a light attack and a heavy attack, but there are actual abilities behind these attacks. So here we get a little bit of a teaser of the magic. We get a little bit of a look of what it might be like to use magic in New World. And I have to say, it's visually impressive. Damn, it looks good. But this does concern me mildly because it makes me wonder, how viable is magic going to be in PvP? It looks like everything is going to be a set down ability based on the ground itself. And it does give me several concerns surrounding its viability when fighting against other players. But what is good to see is there is a way around this, at least when the game starts. They've told us specifically that you're allowed to have 3 weapons, 3 loadouts that come with you venturing out into the world. This means if, hey, magic is not doing that much justice for you, maybe you can switch out to a sword. Maybe you can switch out to a polearm. Maybe you want to pull out a gun and just blow some motherfuckers away. Either way, I think that they will continue to improve on the magic system as time goes on, and if it is an issue in PvP, either it being overpowered or underpowered, I think it'll be very easy for them to fix. Now again here we just saw a nice little charge up with that sword and board technique. We saw an enemy being bashed backwards, which appears to be a different ability and not the same as the lunge, but still acts as a gap closer, which is good to see for PvP. The second part of this is this guy with this lovely big battle axe giving a gigantic wind up and nailing his opponent to the ground, which is also good to see because it should feel like weapons have weight. If you have a heavier weapon, perhaps it does more damage. I think it personally should. But the wind up for it should be a lot longer. You have to be a master at timing these things in order to get it right. This lends to more depth in the gameplay. This lends to more excitement, more variation in playstyle. Hopefully there's not going to be a meta where there are 2 or 3 viable builds and everything else is kind of just falling by the wayside. But I don't think that'll be the case, and even if it is on launch, I do believe they will be able to iteratively fix that problem because that is what they're aiming for. They're not aiming to accomplish a goal immediately, but work towards a set of stable goals, which is very good to see from my perspective at least. Again here, this is a very exciting ability to see, particularly for the bow wielders of this game. This in particular means that if you get your gaps closed, if someone else lunges in towards you, you are not screwed. You can then disengage some fair distance to ensure that you are not immediately one-shot. This allows you to play with the game. Are you going to fake out a lunge? Are you going to try and get this guy to use his disengage early so that you can charge in after him and then muck with him? This lends to psychological gameplay, which is one of the top tier things you can see in any game, is not just having a set of abilities that you spam out and try and use, but to have this mental thought of how is my opponent going to use his abilities against me, and what is my best way to use my abilities to counter what he may do to me. So here in particular, we've got a view of what appears to be a two-handed axe wielder facing off against a corrupted bear. What we have here, we've got a guy buffing himself up. Is this a way to defend himself against the attack that's coming? Is this a last battle cry, some way to do some damage before he collapses to the ground and his friend there in the back has to take over and try and kill this thing? What we're seeing here is that weapons don't just do attacks. Weapons don't just have abilities that do damage. What we're seeing here is that there are ways to buff yourself using your weapon type, which is another brilliant thing to add into the gameplay, because now both in PvE and PvP, a buff might mean the difference between getting stomped into the dirt and stomping someone else into the dirt. This adds more to the gameplay and it makes it emotional as well. All of these moves look like they have impact. All of these moves look like they're going to add more features into what you might want to specialize in. Taking a look here, it looks like we've got another quick expose of the magic in New World, and it appears to be very AoE based. We haven't seen any single target spells yet, which has me a little bit concerned, but this might actually be a great tactic for dealing with larger groups of enemies. Perhaps when it comes to wars and invasions, you'll want those magicians on your side because, well, guess what? They're going to be the ones stomping everyone to pieces in a very short amount of time. And here again, immediately, we have another interesting idea. You don't need to have a shield to block. Now, I believe that this is not a PvP fight here, based on the red glow and the identical enemy to this one that's in the background of this exact image. As you can see him in the back there. But looking at this tells us that you will still be able to block. You will still be able to at least mitigate damage with your weapon if you don't have a shield. If this isn't PvP and this is PvE, what this tells us is that our enemies, at least the NPCs that we end up facing off against, may react to the skills that we give them. They might react based on how we attack them. Now here in particular is very interesting because this looks like the same battle axe character we saw make that massive wind up and swing, but from the other perspective of someone else playing the game with a single-handed hatchet. What's interesting to note is that these abilities are blue, whereas the other abilities were gold. It appears that golden abilities tend to come from two-handed weapons, whereas one-handed weapons may have a more blue hue. And based on that, looking at the magic again, it looks like magic may be red. These colors may be an important indicator as to what your opponent is planning to use against you when he switches out weapons from a one-handed weapon to a two-handed, to magic, to something else. This is good to see, not only from a gameplay perspective, but all the actions that a player takes may give you telegraphed ideas of what to expect from your opponent. On top of that, it gives you an emotional investment in the way you use your abilities. It's not just a shiny light that flashes around you. Your character actually has to flex in some specific way, like we see here, in order to activate that ability. Okay, I'm just stopping here for no other reason than using that two-handed hammer like that looks cool as fuck. Actually, no, I lied. Looking at the scene a second time, analyzing it a bit further, we can see Golden Boy in the background there. He's taking a lunge forward. All the other characters are getting blown away from this guy with this two-handed hammer, but it appears that the guy who's glowing gold there is not being blown away and launching himself forward. Does this mean that maybe when you're in that golden state, you've got some kind of iframe, or you'll take reduced damage, or your abilities won't be interrupted? That's a very good possibility based on this and other gameplay I've seen, and it gives us an idea of what we're launching into. We might be able to counter this guy who's got a two-handed hammer by launching into one of your own abilities instead of diving out the way and attempting to not be hit. Again, this just adds more depth and complexity to the gameplay. This leads to a very high skill cap, which allows you to counter players who spam the single ability. Again, here we see that even the sword and shield abilities have an AoE effect. You can hit more than one opponent at once, and it seems that the combat is based on hit detection. This diversity, this variety may be expanded out by the fact that they've told us we get skill trees based on our mastery, that we get these generalized skill trees that if we spec into, we may become better than other players in one particular aspect of the game. Here we see another interesting scene. We see what looks like a guy dressed up in a Plague Doctor uniform using magic while a frontline tankier bangs his shield and maybe buffs himself up. That means that we're going to have some cooperation in our game. There are going to be abilities that combo together very well. Perhaps that mage there is slowing down enemies so that the tank has enough time to prepare, enough time to maybe recover from an ability that was destroying him and charge back in before the opponents can get towards the mage in the back. This may be an indication that working together is going to have some extra benefits that wouldn't be attainable if you're soloing things. Now this here is an interesting scene for two reasons. First, we see that we've got a two-handed warrior here who's swinging like mad, who's just going absolutely ballistic with this weapon. And this is probably a high-level combo ability. But what's also interesting to notice is that the non-player character in the back is also shining gold. This means that they get abilities too, that it's not just PvP opponents that will have abilities to use against us, but PvE ones too. This is a great way to slip people into the PvP system as well, because you might need to practice against a bunch of PvE enemies, which allows you to slip into the PvP easier because the indicators will be similar. This gives you a lot more to experiment with, and it makes it a lot easier to get into the PvP elements of this game. This is a good way to practice PvP in the future, and the systems are not entirely separated out from one another. So that was just a quick look at all the special attacks. There are a lot to analyze, a lot to go through. I'm sure there's a ton I still missed, even though I spent a few days poring over that. And I'm sure people with bigger channels have probably pointed most of this out already in one form or another. But now it's on to the dev diary itself, the meat and potatoes, the juicy bits that I don't know why you keep coming here for, but okay, let's get into it. So just with this opener, there's a lot of repeated scenes that you immediately notice that may be similar to the special attacks. They're reusing footage, that's fine. Nothing in particularly egregious about that, I don't think. What's interesting is they could have reused the entire special attacks in that little clip, but they didn't. This, what we're looking at here, is a brand new scene. Not only that, but looking here, it appears that the PvE elements of this game are not just stitched together out of nothing. They're using some serious ass abilities. Look at all these sparks. Look at all this fire. That is a corrupted. That is not a player going at these people. This means that we're not just looking at basic attacks, basic abilities that are coming from our enemies. We may have some real gameplay. And looking at this beginning scene, we see something very particular that looks like it's just been ripped straight from Artorias himself. That scene right there. Looking at that, we got a nice little front flip into a slam into the ground. Looks a lot like Artorias, but if he had some fire in him, huh? And as a last final note here, we see a new ability for magic users. This might be a single target ability looking at it. We've got a slam down of the staff causing a lot of fire and a lot of sparks there, and this might be an attack that's aimed at one opponent as opposed to a bunch, because I don't see any AoE rings here, but maybe I'm wrong. This is all just conjecture at this point. This is all just me fanboying.
New World is an MMO, but unlike MMOs, our combat system is 100% real-time action combat.
So looking at the way that your characters move, looking at the way the enemies move, he's just being 100% honest there. It looks like a lot of it is action-based combat, a lot of it is hit detection combat. None of this is really new information based on previous dev diaries, as well as what they're showing us here. This just looks like them giving us a better expose, a better explanation from the dev side of things.
The way you move, the way you position yourself, the way you dodge and lunge, all matters. It's more like an action RPG than a traditional MMO.
Now that terminology does rub me the wrong way a little bit. It's not just an MMO, because, well, MMOs are different. All MMOs do something a little bit different from each other. I mean, World of Warcraft uses targeting directly. Other MMOs might use hit detection. WildStar used a lot of dodging and flipping around. You can't really say it's not just an MMO, because each MMO has a different mechanic behind it. I can understand where they're coming from and what they're trying to say to us about the combat behind this game, that a lot of it is very action-packed and there's a lot of movement, there's a lot of dynamism behind this. And that's, well, what I'm looking for, so I'm fairly excited. If that's not your type of combat, if you're looking for something else, I would like to know what you're looking for, particularly in the comments below, because, well, I don't have all the answers, and you might have a better suggestion of how to do these things than, well, I do.
It's not just gear and stats and things that are going to decide who wins a fight. Positioning and tactics and reaction times and knowing what the different moves an enemy is capable of really affect how successful you're going to be.
Now, this is good to see from a perspective of any company. We've got a fresh new face to look at here. This isn't just the same people talking to us over and over again. This is someone new. This is someone who's got a different perspective, who's worked on a different element of this game. And like he said here, it's not just based on gear. Now, I'm interested to what degree that is true, because obviously gear is going to affect the way you play. Obviously, gear is going to make you better at a particular aspect. Maybe if you're some giga-brain mastermind, you'll be able to go out there in your undies and just spank everyone. But for the rest of us who aren't government experiments, I'm pretty sure that gear will give us an advantage of some kind. So I'm very interested to see how they've implemented that system in particular. To what degree does gear matter? Because you're trying to strike a balancing act where you don't want it to be such that gear is the one and all god that you need in order to play the game properly, but you also don't want it to be the extent that there's no point in getting all the epic and legendary and the best gear in the game, because, well, what would be the point if just your random stick can beat out the best sword? I'm very interested to see to what degree this is true, because this is going to be on a sliding scale. This is not a yes or no kind of thing that he's stating here.
You're going to be.
Also, I'm going to point out here two things that are both cool as fuck. First and foremost is look at that hammer ability. This guy's decided to counter a group of enemies by slam dunking all of them into the ground using some kind of earth-shattering ability. But what's more important to notice about this is he doesn't just have one weapon. If you look at his model, he has one weapon in his hands and he's got one weapon on his back, which means that he can switch out to suit the situation. It might be that this character in particular, this player, has decided to go for two-handed weapons because that's where he specialized the most into, and maybe has a third ranged one for just in case scenarios. We'll see how that plays out when we get into the game. God damn it, Amazon, how dare you be fair to your players and not give me alpha access.
You have to move around in space and you have to set up your attacks, how you're dodging. It makes it very dynamic and visceral.
100% real-time combat.
Weapon Mastery has added a ton of depth and strategy to our combat system.
In New World, the Weapon Mastery system allows a player to grow more proficient in the types of gameplay that they enjoy and they do the most.
Now, as the dev said here, weapon mastery plays a big role in this game. The more you use a weapon, the more proficient with that weapon you will become. The better you will get at this weapon, maybe you unlock extra abilities. If we look here in the bottom right corner, somewhere about there, over there on that side of the screen, you'll see that there are slots for abilities there. There's also a slot for a campfire. There's also a slot for your bag. And on top of that, if you look somewhere up there, you'll see that there's a little bar of health, not only for himself, but for his friend as well. This guy's not adventuring alone. This guy's gone out in a group. And this might mean that you may end up with a mastery and a proficiency in one weapon, but your friend might end up with a proficiency in another, and comboing those together makes both of your lives easier. And as just a more general point, I really like this kind of UI. Everything is out of your way. It gives you a stunning visual look at the world around you, but it gives you all the necessary information you require to survive the New World experience.
So each type of weapon has a different skill tree. As you continue to use that weapon, you'll develop more proficiency and you'll be able to unlock new abilities and bonuses on the skill tree. You can either focus on a specific type of weapon, or you can spread out and try all different types.
This means you could have someone who's a jack of all trade and a master of none. Perhaps you might beat his ass when he's got a two-handed hammer and you've got a gun, but then all of a sudden, this guy switches out to a sword and you might see your ass being handed to you. This is a nice system. This is a great way for players to choose whether they want to go for something more generalized or something more specific. I'm pretty sure as the game goes on, people are going to want to specialize down into certain regions, or maybe attune themselves towards certain types of combat based on what they believe is best for them.
Whatever gear you're wearing, you can have different gear that makes you play different. So if you wanted to be a frontline tank type of player, you could get heavy armor with a shield. If you wanted to be more of a backline shooter, you want something lighter that can allow you to be a little more flexible with a gun or a bow.
Now this does give me a little bit of a concern, because I'm wondering what are the benefits and what are the downsides of light versus heavy armor. There's nothing specific really being said here. If you're in heavier armor, does that mean you can just take more hits, or are there encumbrances that come along with that? Do you move slower? Is it more difficult to use certain weapon types? Because if there's not enough of a disadvantage when it comes to using a particular type of armor set, everyone's just going to go for the heaviest armor set they can. And I wouldn't see why anyone would change out for anything else aside from that heavy armor set, unless there's a particular advantage, a particular skill set that goes with lighter armor. Now this does come with a caveat of me saying this. I haven't played the alpha, I'm hoping to play the beta, so I can only speculate on these points. If it comes out that the heavy armor is just way better and outclasses all of the light armor, I do expect the devs to take a look at that, to note that down, and to make some changes around that. I would love to see a system where there's a lot of variety, where players have a wide open expanse instead of sticking to one singular meta build and then just ignoring everything else.
Like if you want to go in with rifles, a blazing, or you want a bow and arrow, or you want to just sword and board, you can actually equip those. So as you grow as a player, you can have different loadouts at the ready. So whatever the situation calls for, you have all these different types of ways that you can deal with the situation and your playstyle.
This in particular is rather exciting to hear about, mostly because this means that you're not going to be stuck in the situation where your playstyle gets screwed over constantly by a particular enemy type purely because they counter you. They're a hard counter to your style. The fact that you've got the ability to explore an expanse and look at different types of playstyles means that you'll want to try out different types of playstyles. One might not be for you, or one might be okay-ish, and then you try a completely different one and fall in love with that playstyle instead.
A lot of MMOs, you will choose a class, and that will determine the way that you progress. New World's doing a little bit differently, where you pick up a weapon and start fighting with it. And as you fight with it, you begin to earn progression points for that weapon.
As players use weapons, they now gain experience with those weapons.
Okay, not too much to add on to there. That's fairly self-evident that the more you use a weapon, the better you're going to get at it. The more mastery you're going to want to look to put into that weapon if you feel that'll be your ultimate playstyle. What does concern me a little bit is if there is a skill tree associated with a particular type of weapon. Perhaps you'll get to the max level and decide, you know what, this weapon is underpowered, this weapon doesn't do what I want it to do. How do you then switch out? You have to remember that you are locked to one character per server on this game. And I don't think there'll be that many servers available on launch. So there needs to be some kind of system, maybe it's in the game, maybe it's not already, that you are allowed to change out your skill tree at least. Maybe not everything else about your character, but at least the skill tree to match the playstyle you would like at endgame.
That experience gives you points that then you can invest to specialize amongst the different trees.
So your great axe, which is a giant two-handed axe, will have a skill tree. We want these weapons to feel so different depending on the choice you make that it almost feels like a class choice.
With the hatchet, for example, you can focus on throwing or on melee damage. With the sword and shield, you can either focus on offensive damage or more defensive buffs.
With all these different combinations, there's just an enormous amount of variety that the player can achieve.
Variety. That's what we want. More than anything, we want variety as players. We want an open expanse to explore and to find our own way through it. I believe that this game is going to be the type of game that is going to be hilarious to play both in PvE and PvP, and is going to lead to some really weird clips on YouTube of people doing some real freaky stuff as this game evolves and as the players discover more about each skill tree and each type of playstyle.
So magic plays a huge role in New World, and what's special about it in New World is that anyone can do magic. How effective you are at magic will be determined by how much attribute points you spend. If you put a lot of intelligence in and focus, your magic will be much stronger than other people.
Now that's a very interesting thing that he said right there about if you add more intelligence into your character, they're going to be better at magic. Now, I am interested to see how the magic in the game is implemented particularly, because if it is impossible to land your magic abilities, then it doesn't really matter how much intelligence you put into it. If the abilities are just impossible to land, especially in PvP, where people are trying to big brain each other to death, well, then it's kind of going to be pointless going into magic. This is the system I'm the most concerned about, and it might just be because, well, it's the system we've seen the least about.
If you spend enough time with the combat system, you can eventually get good at all of the weapons in the game, and you can change your loadout on the fly based on what you want, what your party needs at the time, what the encounter calls for. Endless customization.
Now there again is something very interesting, is you're not locked into a certain type of playstyle. If you spend enough time with the game, you will be able to get enough mastery in each element of the game that you can switch out your loadout on the fly. Will this make you a master of all playstyles? Well, maybe not unless you're some kind of government experiment, mostly because even if you've leveled something up to the maximum level, doesn't mean you will be better than that guy who's done nothing else but that type of skill from the beginning of the game to the end of the game. This is an interesting aspect to add into the game, I will give you that, and it might get around the problem where you're stuck with a group who needs one particular type of character, and, well, you can't get a hold of that in the open world, so you just switch out to being that character instead yourself.
So one of the most fun things to do in New World is PvP, meaning player versus player. It doesn't stop with just one-on-one, it can be groups in battle, it can be armies in battle.
There's a lot of different ways to experience PvP in New World. The two biggest are faction PvP, which after you join a faction, you can then flag. So you go to Sanctuary, you turn on your PvP flag, and then you can battle the other two factions in PvP.
Now this whole flagging idea, I hope they give us more information about this, because this could either be a worthless system or a very fun system depending on the way it's implemented. What are the rewards? What do you get for flagging yourself? What do you get for fighting PvP? Is it just for the sake of PvP? Hell, maybe that's fun enough. There's not enough information here to go on as to what to do with this kind of system.
Your flag. Now you can only damage other people that are flagged, so it is an opt-in PvP system. It's a system that really rewards skill. It's a system in which a level 50 player can beat a level 60 player, and that's super cool to me.
So now he talks about particularly here that a level 50 player could beat a level 60 player. I mean, a level 1 player in WoW could technically beat a level 10 player, but it's not very likely to happen. Now the question here to think about is, what is the range? What is the capability range within this game? Because sure, it might be very possible for a level 50, but it might not be very easy. At the same time, if someone is a level 60 and you're really good at the game, it'll feel real bad if someone's a level 30 and they've got the same skill set, the same abilities that you do, and you have absolutely no advantage over them. I don't even know how you would balance the system. I leave it up to the devs. I'm pretty sure they're smarter than me when it comes to game design, but I hope they can strike the right balance when it comes to that. I am worried about their PvP systems such as these, but I don't know enough information. There is not enough information currently available for us to make a judgment call on it.
Players can also sign up to participate in territory wars even without being open world PvP flagged.
So wars can be conducted between different companies when you're trying to take over a territory. And in war, it's battles of 50 on 50, an attacking side, a defending side. It's really the pinnacle moment of PvP in the game.
So he talks about faction wars being the pinnacle moment of PvP, which means I hope that there are a lot of them. I hope that there's a large expanse of them, and there are a lot of people who want to get involved in it. What I'm worried about is it feeling like a chore, like you have to PvP. PvP should be fun. It should be something you want to do. It should be something that gets you excited and you go, oh, fuck yeah, I can't wait for the next PvP battle to go down, which is the entire point of the open world PvP, which I will admit I'm still salty about that, but I do understand the decisions as to why it wasn't working. Now, just a quick thing I want to note here about these PvP things that are being shown here is it seems we have different types of PvP involved here. We have different objectives. Right here, we can see that there are these big shining red beams going into the sky. These might be capture points that we need to get to. And taking a look here at this scene, this might be one of the capture points that you either need to defend against or you might need to take over. Is this a control point kind of thing? I would assume so based on that nice little thing, where is it there, that says defend this point. Now what I'm interested to see is how long do these PvP battles last? What do you get out of these PvP battles? Are there any cases where you can exploit the system that make it unfair for everyone else? I wonder how long this kind of singular PvP type is going to last, because obviously variety is the spice of life. We've now got a variety when it comes to all the weapons we use, all the abilities we get, but is there a variety in the PvP? Are we all stuck and locked into the very same type of battle each and every single time? Because I imagine that might end up getting boring after a few months. That might not hold people's attention. If there are different types of PvP, if there are different objectives that go into the PvP, that would be fun to see. That might increase the longevity of the players and get people to play this game for longer periods of time.
For a territory. And in war, it's battles of 50 on 50, an attacking side, a defending side. It's really the pinnacle moment of PvP in the game.
Just as a quick last look before this video ends, is we've got a bunch of people here battling to bash down a door. Now this to me means we get a little bit of a destructible environment. We get a little bit of our forts taking damage, things that might need to be repaired by our crafters later, things that we might need to reinforce to make it more difficult for invading forces to take over our settlements. I like the idea that there's a lot more than one single element in the PvP, but as I said before, is it going to be only one particular game type? Are there going to be different types of PvP scenarios? But that's the end of this Developer Diary Call to Arms deep dive. Along with a little bit of a look into some of the special attacks, I figured I'd put them together because, well, they're kind of interlinked just a little bit. I'm excited for this game. I'm happy to see all the elements that are going into this game. I have a few concerns, a few doubts, but you know, I'm thinking overall this is going to be a good game. This is going to be a worthwhile one, at least from my perspective. If this game isn't going to be for you, well then hopefully me playing the beta and being able to give some kind of review will be able to help you decide whether it's actually for you or not. If it's a shit game, I am more than happy to tell people it's a shit game. But currently, I am very excited for this game. Currently, I think that all the fundamentals going into this game are going to lead to a good system. But that's it for now. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like. If you didn't, well, you know where the dislike button is. Subscribe if you want more content like this. But more than anything, I hope you have a great day. I hope everything goes your way, but it's time now for you and I to bugger off. I'll see you in the next one.